The wife found a stash left by her husband, and upon seeing a phone number on the bill, she dialed it via video call and froze from. The morning started as usual. Roger Moore went to work, but soon she received a call informing her that her husband had died in a car accident. Slippery roads, black ice, lost control, and something else that now had no significance. How could she believe it? Sarah didn't believe for a long time. She lived for several months as if he were still there. It was especially hard to wake up and realize anew that he was gone and would never return. But how could he not return when they had so many plans, when they were supposed to live and thrive together, when his slippers were still under the coat rack just as he left them? Just come and put them on, but he won't come. And all his things could be thrown away or given to someone else, but she was afraid even to touch them. It seemed that if everything remained as it was with Roger, then... No, she wasn't going crazy. It was just very difficult to admit that her husband was no longer there and never would be. She would pick up one of his things, thinking to throw it away or sell it, and then she would carefully put it back in its place. What if he comes back, asks for it, and what will I tell him? No, let it stay. Then her husband's things were kept in place just to maintain this foolish belief in the what if and the illusion of that belief. It also happened because she was completely alone now. Yes, they had lived almost 15 years together, always just the two of them. Roger was an orphan, so there was no family. Sarah's family had all died before she got married. They married out of great love and were very happy. They just didn't have children, and why, they never really figured out. For the first 5 years, they lived as if they didn't notice their childlessness. Well, if there weren't any, there weren't. They were so good together. Then Sarah finally went to see doctors. Well, everything seemed fine. They said her husband needed to get checked too, and everything was fine with him too, but still no children. They hoped that they would still have them, because sometimes it happens. Well, they continued to live as they were used to, hoping that someday. However, after celebrating their 15th anniversary together, suddenly they seemed to realize that no, they wouldn't have children. They started talking about the possibility of adoption. That's not an easy matter either. Perhaps not easier than giving birth themselves. And there were plenty of arguments between them. Should they adopt a boy or a girl, a baby or an older child? In short, they discussed a lot. And they had already reached an agreement. They had already managed to get permission to adopt a child. Only the final steps remained, and now she had to come to terms with the thought that she would never have anyone, because a single unmarried person would not be allowed to adopt anyone. There were enough complete families dreaming of children. And who was she now? Barren, with everyone around her dying? Well, it would have been one thing if it were just her husband, but there were no other relatives either. So there was nothing to strive to replace those she couldn't protect with this already unfortunate child. Of course, no one told her that. Sarah thought so herself. And if she was honest, she didn't want anything anymore. She was almost 40 soon, which means most of her life had already been lived. What was left for her there? Even if she managed to adopt a baby, would she be able to raise them? Could she make them happy? In her current state, it seemed impossible. She couldn't hold on to anything with her powerless hands. After Roger's death, life froze. She went to work, came back home, but there was nothing else to do at home. And so she didn't do anything, already perfectly understanding that her husband had gone forever, but still decided to leave things as they were with him. One day, as if awakening, she looked at herself, at the apartment from the outside, and was horrified. If Roger could see what I've become and our apartment, she thought. He was such a neat freak. And here I let everything go, justifying myself by preserving his memory. But would this have been possible with him around? What if he sees? What if his soul is tormented right now by what I've become? Thinking like this, Sarah suddenly felt a surge of energy. Her soul came alive. She began to tidy up the apartment, which was dusty and neglected, as if no one had lived in it for the past 6 months. Well, actually, she hadn't. You see, she was a widow, a lonely woman with no one and nothing left. No. Now everything needed to be restored to its former state, to make the home just as it was when her husband was alive. The apartment was quite spacious, a 3-bedroom one, so there was a lot of work to be done. But Sarah didn't seem to feel tiredness. She rejoiced to see every corner coming back to life, filling with air and regaining its former appearance. As a final touch, she left the smallest room, which had been Roger's study. He used to do his work there, sometimes spending all weekend. And she, when she felt bored alone in the apartment, sometimes settled into her armchair with a book. Oh, those were blissful evenings. Yes, it was painful now to enter this room, to look at the empty chair where he once sat, and at his now empty desk. She gave some papers to her husband's colleagues, which might be useful to them. Now everything that remained seemed to be of no use to anyone. But cleaning was still necessary. Let it be empty in there, but clean. They had once dreamed of converting this room into a nursery, but now it seemed it would always remain empty. Or, I'll make it my own room, Sarah decided, as if forgetting that the entire apartment was now hers. She started cleaning, and in the end began to go through the drawers of the desk, in which there was almost nothing left, except for a few bills rolled up. She took out this stash of her husband's, smiling. So, Roger, like many men, was hiding some money from me. Well, now we'll never know what it was for. Maybe it was for her as a gift or for some of his own needs. Ah, what difference does it make now? There's no way of knowing anymore. Sarah removed the elastic band, spread out the bills, sorted through them, and noticed a phone number written on one of the bills. There was no doubt that it was Roger who wrote it. She knew her husband's handwriting. But why did he write it on the money? And what are those symbols written next to it? He never did that before. There were notebooks for notes, or anywhere else he could have written it down. Maybe he borrowed from someone and didn't have time to return it. Although none of his acquaintances mentioned that Roger owed them money. But maybe out of politeness. The amount wasn't that large. The only way to find out the truth was to call that number. But what would she say? Sarah closed the desk drawers, went to her bedroom, only then realizing how tired she was. But she had done a considerable amount of work. She was completely happy with what she had accomplished, if not for this mysterious stash and the number written on it. To call? Just to see who would be on the other end of the line. She knew many of her husband's friends. But today it was already late, and tomorrow she planned to tidy herself up. Over the past 6 months, she had let herself go quite a bit. So, laying the money on the table, she headed to the bathroom, thinking that there was nothing particularly special about it. She would call tomorrow and find out everything. Surely, everything would be revealed very simply, and she would quickly forget about it. The next day, Sarah visited a beauty salon, got a haircut, and a manicure. She regretted not having time for the rest of the procedures. She couldn't wait to make the call, although upon waking up, she wasn't sure if it was a good idea, but it was better to satisfy her curiosity. Let there be no secrets between her and her deceased husband. Especially since there probably weren't any. Everything would be clarified very simply, but some excitement still lingered. Returning home, Sarah took a deep breath and dialed the coveted number, activating video call. And then what she didn't expect or hope for began. A woman answered the call. Not to say she was beautiful, quite ordinary, about the same age as Sarah, around 40. Moreover, she was pregnant. Hello. We're not acquainted, but I need to change that. My name is Mrs. Sarah Moore. You can just call me Sarah, and you are? I'm Pamela Hawkins. But why do you want to get to know me? Asked the woman, surprised but not alarmed. She was quite pleasant and spoke kindly. But what connected her to Roger? I would like to meet you, to talk in person, not over the phone, you understand? Don't worry, I don't wish you any harm and won't cause you any trouble, Sarah reassured her. I don't even know. You see, I'm in a situation. I hardly go out anywhere. I'm already quite far along. So maybe you could wait until the baby is born? Pamela said with a smile. No, I'd prefer it sooner. My matter isn't exactly serious, and it won't take long, but still. Besides, after the baby is born, you'll be even busier. And would you mind if I come over to you briefly? Strangely enough, Pamela agreed, gave her address, and said she could be reached now. This stranger lived on the other side of town. And during the long journey, Sarah wound herself up completely. She was already sure she was going to meet her husband's mistress. And apparently, he had been with her for a long time, given her advanced pregnancy. At least a year, maybe even longer. Yes, it was not surprising. Barren women were often abandoned, but why? Why didn't he tell me anything? Why did he seriously discuss adopting a child with me? Was he planning to leave me later with this adopted baby, or planning to leave her with his child? Oh, Roger, I never would have thought you were such a master at hiding secrets, and I certainly never thought you would betray me. After all these years, you never gave me any reason to doubt your faithfulness, and then suddenly some Pamela appears. Oh, why am I even going to her? What do I want to find out? Maybe it's better to remain ignorant? Whatever I find out, nothing can be changed now. It will only torment my soul, and not just mine. It will cast a shadow on the good name of my own husband. But she understood, ignorance in her case was not the best option. There would be no peace anyway, so it's better to know everything right away. Therefore, hesitating like this, she still drove to the home of the unfamiliar woman and rang the doorbell. Pamela opened it, invited her into the apartment without any suspicions, but Sarah was becoming increasingly anxious. In the room, on the bookshelf, she saw a photograph of her husband, the same as at her home, only without the mourning frame or black ribbon. She probably doesn't know he's dead. Poor thing. How carefree. Doesn't she worry that her lover hasn't visited or called for half a year? Maybe she didn't even love him at all? Maybe she doesn't even want the child, and she'll give it to me? Maybe Roger got involved with her for that reason, used her as a surrogate mother? Crazy thoughts raced through her mind. But still, to find out the truth, she needed to ask. But how? She decided to start from a distance. And who's this? She asked Pamela, pointing to the portrait. Your husband? No, Pamela smiled. He's a friend of my husband's. A very good man. He helped us with Philip, and then, when I was left alone and found myself in a difficult situation. But it's been a while since we heard from him. His phone isn't answering. And what did you want to talk about? I wanted to talk about him. Please don't be upset, you shouldn't. Oh, why did I even come here? This is my husband. He died 6 months ago, Sarah said, tormented by having to deliver such bad news. And the news, apparently, was indeed very heavy. Pamela sighed, covered her face with her hands, and burst into tears. I'm sorry, Pamela, I'm sorry. Sarah exclaimed, hugging her and crying too. Oh, I shouldn't have come and talked about this. But it happened. Women's curiosity and suspicion. And she told her about what had brought her to this house, about Roger's sudden death, about the found money, about her doubts about her husband's fidelity. And when I saw that you were expecting a baby, I even made up a whole story. And now I see that I was wrong. I believe you. No, Sarah, the child is from my own husband. I never had anything with your Roger, and it couldn't have been. But he really was a very good person, helped both Philip and me after what happened to Philip. Pamela waved her hand hopelessly. It's such a pity he's gone. I feel sorry for you. And what about your husband? He's not, also? Sarah gasped. No, of course not. He's alive, but he's just unlucky. He's in prison. No, he's not a thug, not a criminal, just unlucky. He stood up for a girl on the street, a very young one. 2 guys were bothering her. Well, he defended the girl, gave those scoundrels the good beating, but it turns out they were the sons of some bosses. Philip didn't do anything wrong to them. Well, he gave them some bruises, broke one guy's nose. For that, he could have gotten 15 days, or maybe even nothing at all. He's not guilty. But these big shots considered it a serious offense, and they also remembered that he had been convicted for some nonsense in his youth. Oh, they took Philip, gave him the full treatment. I don't know what would have become of me if it weren't for Roger. I don't have any family left. My mother was ill for a long time, and I took care of her, so I got married not very young, only after her passing. But we still decided to have a child. Philip and I really want kids. After crying enough and talking about everything, they parted as friends. Sarah decided that now she should help the person her husband cared for. She didn't even think about Roger having an affair with Pamela anymore. The woman was completely honest with her, telling her everything without hiding anything. Sarah felt sorry for her. Late and difficult pregnancy, no husband by her side, and no family either. And even the only person she could rely on was gone. How could Sarah leave her? She gave her the money she found in her husband's desk, promised to visit, and asked her to call her in case of any trouble. Pamela, don't hesitate, call me. I'll accompany you to the maternity hospital, I'll meet you there, and we'll buy everything necessary for the baby. I'm not rich, of course, but I won't leave you, don't doubt it. And for this, your child will be kind of like a nephew or godson to me. I don't have any of my own. Thank you, Sarah. I'll try not to bother you too much, but it's so much easier now. Don't think that I need the money, I just lack the support. And now I think I'm not alone in the world. And my child will have someone to rely on if anything happens, Pamela thanked her. Sarah was not lying. She was genuinely pleased with this acquaintance and grateful to Roger for it. She felt that now she was not alone. She had loved ones who needed her help. In other words, Sarah had someone to live for. She enjoyed going to baby stores but didn't buy anything, remembering that it's not good luck to buy things for a baby in advance. However, she enjoyed looking at the delicate tiny clothes, toys, and other necessities for the baby. How often she used to do this before, still hoping to become a mother. Now she had no such hope, but still, with someone else's child, she would be able to enjoy it. It was already known that a boy would be born. And Pamela said that they decided to name him Leo with her husband. But unfortunately, their friendship was short-lived. One morning, Sarah called Pamela, and from her voice, it was clear that something was wrong. Sarah, it's starting for me. The ambulance is already on the way. They'll probably take me straight to the maternity hospital, she said tearfully. Oh, sweetheart, don't worry. Everything will be fine, you know that. I'll go to the maternity hospital right away too. I'll be there, don't worry. And she quickly called a taxi, although she realized that she wouldn't be able to help in any way. After all, she wouldn't even be allowed into the delivery room, and if she were, well, at least it would give her some peace of mind knowing that Pamela was already under the care of doctors, and everything would be fine with her and the baby. Although the birth of little Leo was expected only in 2 weeks. But maybe it's not so critical. However, she was met with terrible news at the maternity hospital's information desk. Are you the relative of the mother in labor? They asked Sarah sympathetically. Yes, the only one. What happened to her? She asked, frightened. The situation is very serious. Doctors are fighting for the lives of both the mother and the baby, but Pamela didn't make it. The boy survived. His life and health were out of danger, but he was orphaned immediately after birth. What to do? Sarah had to take on the organization of the funeral and caring for the baby. Of course, she couldn't prove her relationship with Pamela, there wasn't any. But besides her, the deceased didn't have any close relatives either, so Sarah started the process of becoming the legal guardian. She also informed Philip in the correctional facility about what happened, as he should have been allowed to say goodbye to his wife. Sarah didn't know him at all, only from her friend's stories, but still felt sorry for him. Not only was he imprisoned for seemingly no reason, leaving his pregnant wife, but he also found out about her death at such a moment. She needed to instill in him at least some confidence that everything would be fine with his son. It was hard to even imagine what would be on his mind after he learned the terrible news of his wife's death. Well, at least Leo was doing fine. The boy was really healthy. Even before Sarah could arrange all the paperwork, they left him under the care of doctors at the maternity hospital. Here, she could breathe a small sigh of relief. Since she had previously been preparing for the adoption of a child, she still had the documents. She knew where and how to apply. She hoped that everything would go well, and she would become the guardian of the child at least until the father returned. And then, who knows, maybe he'll leave the boy to me. Sarah thought hopefully. Things went very wrong for Philip. Learning about his wife's death, he was sure that he would be allowed to attend the funeral. After all, he didn't have much time left to serve, and the reason was more than valid. But the head of the correctional facility firmly said, "Sorry, Philip, I can't let you go. Yes, the reason is weighty, but you have a violation here, and not only because of that. It's far to go, you won't make it anyway, that's one. And two, I can't afford to send a convoy for you. Yes, they recently let one guy go to his father's funeral, but he lived nearby. Besides, they took 2 people to the trial at the same time, that's why they allowed that. But to drive half the country because of one person. So I offer my condolences and all that, and for these days, so as not to bother, I can put you in a separate cell. Maybe even give you something to remember her by. But there's no way I can take you there and back." Philip understood that arguing in such a situation was pointless, but he couldn't not come to his wife's funeral. Taking advantage of the temporary relaxation in the regime, he decided to escape. Yes, he realized that he might not make it. He understood that he might be caught, and most likely, in this case, his sentence would be increased. But he couldn't just sit and not try to do something. He was tormented by the injustices of life that had been coming down on him since childhood, so even without much hope of success, he ran away. And at first, it even seemed that everything was going well. He managed to get out of the fence. Only the most dangerous place remained to be crossed, the field where a person could be seen from all sides. The fugitive was spotted by a guard standing on a tower. He acted according to the instructions, first shot into the air, then aimed at the fugitive. He didn't think that they would detain this person anyway. The main thing for the young performer was to impress the authorities, as the detention guaranteed an unscheduled promotion and leave. Yes, he was lucky, but Philip wasn't. The bullet hit his spine. The convoy received a well-deserved reward and went home satisfied, but Philip. He was taken to the infirmary, then transferred to the hospital in the city, but even there, the doctors only saved his life, but his health. No one would bother with a colleague who had no prospects other than returning to prison. But there was no point in keeping him there either. Who would take care of a non-walking invalid who required constant care? They didn't even bother to try him for attempted escape, so he didn't stay behind bars for long. Philip was acquitted and released. In a wheelchair, he came home, hoping only to visit Pamela's grave and at least bid farewell to her there, and of course, see his son. There was no other reason for him to live. He knew that Leo was now with some friend of his wife's, and hoped that she was a kind woman who wouldn't mistreat his little one. For him, being free meant clearing up some matters. For instance, resolving the issue with the apartment and settling scores with life. Why live on after everything that had happened? No relatives, no close ones, just a son whom he hadn't seen and who wasn't even a year old yet. Why would he be needed by the child? Just a hindrance, a burden. Well, if he lived with a woman who cared for the baby and wouldn't abandon him. And he, Philip, didn't intend to impose himself on anyone. Struggling to reach Sarah's apartment, he rang the bell. When she opened the door, he introduced himself, realizing that a stranger wasn't obliged to rejoice at his arrival, but she welcomed the guest warmly, introduced him to Leo, and seated him at the table. First, she talked about her son, about how he was growing, what the doctors said about his health and development. She showed him the room equipped for the boy. She was afraid to touch on the main question. Sarah understood better than anyone how painful this question would be for a person who had lost his love. But it was necessary to talk about it. Pamela told me about you, but not much. Unfortunately, we met shortly before the birth. Well, you understand. She was waiting for you. It's a pity I didn't talk to her more, but I didn't know it would turn out like this. I thought we had plenty of time ahead. After all, I wanted to be there, to help her with the baby. I was completely alone after my husband's death, and he also died suddenly. I don't even know how you met him and why I didn't know anything about you. How did that happen? Well, it's all very simple. We're brothers, he's older, I'm 2 years younger. But we were separated in childhood and found each other shortly before I was convicted, Philip replied. How is that possible? I always thought Roger had no relatives, and then suddenly a brother. A blood relative? Sarah was amazed. Yes, blood brothers. We didn't know our father and our mother. Well, she can't be called an exemplary mother either. When I was 5 and Roger was 7, she died. I don't know why. We were too young to be told. And there really were no other relatives, so we held onto each other tightly, understanding that we were the only family we had. We were put in an orphanage. Philip fell silent, lost in thought, apparently immersed in memories. I knew Roger grew up in an orphanage, but he never talked about having a brother. How did you two separate? Were you adopted? My husband told me he ran away from the orphanage more than once, but he didn't talk much about it. I guess he didn't want to reopen old wounds. Good kids don't run away from good places, right? No, we weren't adopted. But running away. Yes, we decided to. That's how fate separated us. It was quite nice there, no better than with our mother. But we wanted to go to the sea, we dreamed about it. Shortly before her death, Mom suddenly started talking about how we were going south soon. It's great there, warm, fruits grow right on the street. The man smiled sadly. Well, we didn't go with her, didn't make it. And while living in the orphanage, Roger and I were dreaming about going there together. It all seemed pretty simple. If it's warm there, then a home isn't needed. If fruits grow right on the street, then there's no need for money for food since you just pick and eat those fruits. And since we're still little, we can go there without much trouble. We'll lie and say we got lost, that we're going home. So, we stole some bread from the canteen to have something to eat on the way and at the station. But then doubt struck me. Which train goes south, to the sea? We didn't even know geography. I started persuading my brother to turn back, but he wouldn't budge. You're a coward, Philip. If you don't want to, then I'll go alone, and you stay in your orphanage. I'll figure something out on my own. The main thing is to go. They'll take us somewhere. The train was supposed to leave soon. Roger got on it, and I stood there, crying. It was scary to go, scary to stay, scary to lag behind my brother, and I was mad at him. While I was standing there, crying, the train left. I wandered around, thinking Roger would come back, but the police detained me. The orphanage had already reported the children missing. They brought me back. And Roger wasn't found? How could they find him? They asked me where my brother went. What could I say? I got on a train. Which one? I don't know. I went to the sea. Which one? What can a 6-year-old kid tell? That's how we got lost in this world. He later told me how he spent the night across the country. From train to train, from city to city. And he made it to the sea. Then he wanted to come back but didn't know how. Anyway, he spent that summer, surrendered to the first orphanage he found, but it was far from our native lands and from me. They didn't bother bringing him back, and then it all just sort of faded away for both of us. No, I remembered that I had a brother somewhere, but I didn't know how to find him. So, you grew up in that first orphanage? Sarah sighed over the brother's tragic fate. Yeah, that's where I lived. Finished school, vocational school. Then I was convicted in my youth. Spent a year in a detention center for stupidity. Lived on after that, quietly. Hoped to straighten out my fate. Even got married. Thought I'd have a family, but my first marriage was a disaster. My wife refused to have children. Then she started partying, left. I thought maybe it wasn't my destiny to live with family or with loved ones. Apparently, that's the cross I bear to being alone. And then I met Pamela. Philip lowered his head, lost in thought. Life hasn't spared either you or Roger. We got married as adults too. We dreamed of children, but it didn't work out. We wanted to adopt, but we didn't have time. My Roger died, and I knew little about his past. Now I have no one to ask about it. Well, given the circumstances, I can only envy him. Look at what I'm left with, legs that should just be cut off and thrown away. Don't worry, Sarah, I won't burden you. I'll come by sometimes to check on Leo. Have you decided to keep him permanently? Of course. I love him as my own. But I'm not going to hide you from him. Of course, he should know his father's name. And what about you? Are you planning to live alone? Sarah was surprised. Who else am I going to live with? If I can live at all. I'm not exactly tenant material, as you can see. Philip didn't share all his plans with her. And, to be honest, he himself didn't know what he would do next. Sarah seemed to understand. Why be so gloomy? You have someone to live for. And you know what? Stay with us for now. There's plenty of room, and we won't be a bother to each other. And if anything, you can take care of your son. And anyway, it's easier together. As for your condition, you need to get your pension sorted out now, then see a doctor, as they treat a lot of things nowadays. Sarah tried to cheer him up. They do treat things, yes, for money. And, as you understand, I don't have any and won't. But there are quotas. We need to find out everything. And we'll do it together. That's why I say, stay. And you can find work, it's definitely something to do. Your hands work fine, after all. Philip didn't resist for long. He really couldn't imagine living alone. And, honestly, he didn't want to be separated from his son. While they were talking with Sarah, the boy was sleeping, but when he woke up, he reached out to his father. He must have recognized him. So they started living together. Sarah wasn't lying. She enthusiastically began to inquire about the quota for Philip's surgery, but she was told that priority was given to children and promising citizens of working age. And what about your relative? Twice convicted. And the prospects for recovery are very doubtful, they explained to her. Well, how doubtful are they? The doctor said anything's possible. We just shouldn't delay the surgery. Besides, he's a single father, he has a little son. So he gets a pension, and the son too, for the loss of his mother, and you're his guardian. So, of course, we'll put him in line, but it's hard to promise anything. Wait. If anything, we'll let you know. Sarah came home upset, but Philip met her with good news. He found a job, and a pretty good one at that. It happened quite by accident. He called an old acquaintance who knew him. He worked in a car park and said they were currently looking for drivers. I'm telling you, my legs don't work. How can I be a driver? Besides, I've never heard of disabled people being eagerly hired for work. Philip waved off. What's the big deal? You'll drive a car with hand controls. It's perfectly normal. We hire disabled people too. One guy, he's mute and deaf, he drives. So don't doubt it, Philip, they'll hire you. And they did hire Philip. He turned out to be a decent driver. Plus, being a former convict without legs, some of his colleagues occasionally expressed dissatisfaction. Is this our humanity, tolerance, or whatever it's called? They'll start giving him concessions now and better assignments. Don't doubt it. And they'll boast about how well they treat everyone, hiring disabled people without discrimination. It's a plus for the boss. And for this wheelchair-bound fellow too. But it's just extra hassle for us, some drivers grumbled among themselves. They were wrong. Nobody made any special concessions for him. Philip sometimes overheard conversations among his colleagues, though no one spoke directly to him about it. But he couldn't help but feel the attitude towards him. What could he do? He resigned himself to it, tried to work without complaints, that's all. He needed to earn money to support his son and maybe for the surgery. There was no hope of saving up such an amount, nor of ever getting that surgery, but money was needed anyway. Sarah talked him out of selling the apartment he lived in with Pamela. No, now's not the time to sell real estate. I'm sure you'll recover. And then what without your own place? Leo will grow up. Won't he need an apartment? For now, we can rent it out, that's all. That's also money. Use that to save up for the surgery. And don't lose hope for the quota either. So they did. They rented out the apartment. Philip stayed to live with Sarah and the baby. They lived together harmoniously, and Philip tried not only not to show, but even not to admit to himself that he had fallen in love with this woman. As for Sarah, she didn't think about love, she was just happy. For the first time since her husband's death, she believed that she could live not alone, as an unwanted widow, quietly aging in her loneliness. Now she was a happy family woman with a child who loved her like a mother, and with a man who wasn't her husband, but also needed her. In a fit of kindness, one day she couldn't resist and even did what she had been thinking about for a long time, but hadn't dared to do. She took in a large homeless dog. Maybe it wasn't the most prudent move to bring a dog into the apartment where a little child and a disabled person lived, but she couldn't bear to see how clearly intelligent, trained, but apparently unwanted dog wandered the streets dirty and hungry. Sarah sometimes fed him, and he apparently recognized her as his owner. How could she abandon him? She brought him home, washed him, took him to a veterinary clinic, where he was examined and given the necessary vaccinations. So their family got Rocky, a faithful guard and protector. Philip also grew to love the dog, although he laughed at Sarah's sudden desire to make everyone happy. You've already got enough on your plate with Leo and me, and now a dog too. This Rocky also demands attention and everything else. How do you not get tired of all this? He marveled. But I'm sure he's not at all superfluous in our home. Nobody just appears in someone else's life for no reason. Apparently, it was meant to be that we have a dog, she could only reply. Philip didn't argue. Rocky really wasn't superfluous in their lives. He gave them a certain sense of assurance that the future held no dangers. However, if not with danger, Philip did encounter some unpleasantness. Actually, it was a common occurrence in the life of every taxi driver, as they have to deal with all kinds of people. Everyone can tell you something from their practice about scammers and just unreasonable people. Taxi drivers were robbed, attempted to be killed, and drawn into criminal stories. Once, two strangers got into Philip's car who he immediately didn't like. They were nervous, twitchy, didn't specify a destination. They just asked to drive faster, and they would tell him where to drop them off later. Philip didn't know how to get rid of such passengers, but everything happened on its own. The men suddenly jumped out of the car as soon as they saw a police car ahead. Philip sighed with relief. He got rid of them, and that was that. But it turned out he hadn't gotten rid of them completely. In their haste, apparently, they forgot a bag on the back seat. Opening it, Philip saw bundles of money. This was serious. Apparently, he had transported criminals who had committed a robbery. It would be naive to think they simply forgot about their loot. They would definitely try to find him and get the money back, but the amount was quite substantial. It would be enough for the surgery and subsequent recovery, which was Philip's main dream, so the temptation was great. Not having decided what to do, he came home with the bag to consult with Sarah. Upon seeing the money, she was frightened. There's a lot here. No, Philip, you shouldn't consider them yours. Surely these were criminals, and they will want them back. You won't get away from them later. I don't even know what's better, to report to the police or wait for these scoundrels to come and take the money themselves. And I don't know either. I don't expect any kindness from the police with my past. But I wouldn't want to deal with bandits either. All right, let's wait. Perhaps tomorrow we'll come up with something. But they didn't have to wait until morning, neither did those who left such a sum in the taxi. The criminals remembered the driver and the car's license plate. Finding Philip was no trouble. Sarah and Philip were already getting ready for bed when there was a demanding knock on the door. It's them, Sarah guessed. I'll call the police, and you open the door, but try to keep them engaged in some conversation. Sarah went into the room. Philip wheeled up to the door and opened it. Yes, the very same passengers were standing on the doorstep, and the expression on their faces didn't bode well. Ah, and he's also legless, one said disdainfully. So, Uncle, are you going to give us back the forgotten things in the car? Or are you going to whistle for us that you turned them into the Lost and Found Bureau? Are you talking about the bag left in the car? I'm not trained to whistle, but I did hand it over as required, so you've come to the wrong place. Contact the taxi company, and maybe they'll return it to you. Well, if you can prove it's yours, he replied firmly. Smooth talker. He handed it over. We'll see about that. Show us. We know for sure it's stashed somewhere with you. The thugs turned the wheelchair, boldly entering the apartment. Keep it down, there's a child sleeping there, Philip said. Well, have some pity on your kid, give it all back yourself, otherwise we'll have to turn this place upside down. Do you think we want to rummage through this mess? But we're not used to losing our own. We're more into taking someone else's. So, man, I don't advise resisting, or you might end up without hands. Philip, realizing the situation was taking a serious turn, was about to shout for Sarah to give the damn bag to the thugs, but the situation unexpectedly changed. From the corner of the hallway, Rocky darted out like a black lightning, whom no one had paid attention to. But the dog was watching the guests, and realizing that danger threatened the owner, he lunged at the enemies, clamping powerful jaws on one of them's arm. There was shouting, chaos. Sarah rushed out of the room, alerting everyone that the police were already on their way. Leo, who had woken up, started crying in fright. Fortunately, the law enforcement officers didn't keep them waiting long. They had already been informed about the robbery of the private exchange office and were looking for the criminals. They were arrested. Philip handed over the bag. Sarah wept over Rocky, whom the thugs had managed to injure. After all the formalities were observed, the police left. Philip began to calm his son down, and Sarah called for emergency veterinary care. She was very worried about Rocky. Fortunately, as it turned out, the dog's life was not in danger, and after receiving treatment, the veterinarians left. Sarah and Philip, trying to calm down after what had happened, sat in the kitchen to have tea. Oh, Philip, you should quit this job. It doesn't just give you money, it brings so much worry. How will I feel seeing you off and waiting for you afterwards, she said. Philip couldn't agree with that. Well, no, being without work isn't good either. What about my pension and the money from renting out the apartment? I still haven't lost hope of saving up for the surgery. It seems we won't be waiting for quotas in the next 100 years. And about the dangers. They don't happen that often. It happened to me once, so I guess I've reached my quota of unpleasantness. Well, agree? Oh, you always joke, Sarah sighed, disagreeing with this optimistic statement. And it turned out that the story with the stolen money had a continuation. During the investigation, Philip learned about the owner of the robbed exchange office, Charles Hudson. He was an elderly, impressive man. He was very impressed by the disabled man's deed, who didn't appropriate the money and, without fearing the bandits, did everything to ensure that the entire sum was returned to the owner. He thanked Philip sincerely, but Philip had no intention of hiding anything and attributing non-existent merits to himself. Oh, come on, I'm not that much of a hero. At first, I did consider keeping it all for myself, but, you know, for the right cause. After all, I need the surgery, and it's not cheap. So Sarah pointed me in the right direction, and my protector became Rocky, my dog. He's the one who suffered the most, still getting bandaged up to this day. Charles, on the other hand, came to visit Philip and Sarah not so much to meet the whole family, but with an offer that couldn't be refused. Sitting at the table with the hosts, he said, you see, am a completely lonely man. That's just how it turned out. And not only that, I recently found out that I don't have much time left to live. No, it's true, cancer, terminal stage, no chances. No treatment in this condition will help anymore, it'll only prolong the agony, and that's of no use to me. If it's fated, then better sooner rather than later. Yes, what am I talking about? I decided to give Philip money for the surgery and to put him in a good clinic where they'll definitely help. You, Philip, are still young, you have a whole life ahead of you. Besides, you have a son, and he needs a father. The man paused, lowering his head. I had 2 of them, sons, I mean. Well, there would have been, but I was too busy with my affairs to notice they existed. I chose a mother for them who was completely unsuitable for the children, and as a result, I ended up alone. So here, I'll help you out. You're like redemption for my sins, or something like that. Philip and Sarah couldn't believe their luck. Was this really happening? It turned out, yes. Charles wasn't joking about such an important matter, and soon he began to implement his plan. Philip was admitted to the hospital, and treatment began. The elderly man who organized everything was constantly informed and stayed in touch with Sarah, letting her know how everything was going. She didn't have much time to go to the hospital herself. She had a child to take care of, and she understood that a lonely, elderly, let alone terminally ill man simply lacked company. She started inviting him over just to talk, to spend time in a calm family atmosphere. Charles didn't object. On the contrary, he was grateful for it. He really missed having a family. From his rather sparing stories, she already knew that he had no personal life for a long time. Yes, as they say, I always bet on the wrong horse. I saw the purpose of my life in earning money, developing business, and it seemed like I succeeded. And only then did I think, what do I need it all for? Turns out, neither money nor anything else is needed. Nothing can help with this damn loneliness, he admitted sadly. And so, were you never married? Sarah asked. Well, how to say? I mean, it seemed like I was about to, like I was already married, but it turned out, again, not to the right one, and not in the right way, and not for anything. Many years ago, I married a girl from a not-so-simple, very influential family. Well, what could go wrong? But everything did. Her parents married her off to me to tame her because their daughter went wild. Well, I also thought everything would be fine. We got married, she gave birth to a son, but she immediately passed him on to nannies. She didn't need the child at all, she even seemed disgusted by him. And then life completely fell apart. Her father was imprisoned with confiscation, her mother died. My wife was left with nothing, and she was pregnant. I thought, we'll live, but where? She was used to another life. She didn't need it anymore. I became the main obstacle, and the little son became one too. She gave birth to a second child and ran away with both kids. At first, I felt relieved. Living with her was very difficult. But then I realized, what about the kids? But I couldn't find her anymore. She left one, joined another. I only found her 3 years later, but it was too late. She was already completely degraded. And the children? Sarah asked. They died, perished, she said. She started weaving something about some accident in which she also got hurt. Well, and money, of course, asking for it. In short, that's where it all ended. I didn't try to arrange my life anymore. There were, of course, some meetings, but in every woman, I saw only greed and deceit. Maybe I was wrong, but it's too late to talk about it now. So I live as a recluse, and until recently, everything suited me, but now. Horrible. It's even strange that all of us, you, me, my husband, Philip, have lives full of such complex, tragic events. I mean, Roger and I lived well, only there were no children, and then he died, unexpectedly, tragically, in an accident. But his childhood wasn't easy either. They're brothers with Philip. They grew up in orphanages, just in different ones. Wait. Roger and Philip. But my children were named that too. And who was their mother? Do you know anything, Sarah? Charles suddenly became worried. I don't know anything. And they themselves knew very little. Her name was Helen, and it seems she died. And do you think they could be? Sarah was at a loss. But such coincidences don't happen. Exactly, they don't. Names, destinies, everything matches up. Well, at least something from my husband's past survived. Documents, photographs, everything is very important. I'll try to find them now, but I'm not sure if I can, she said, realizing how important all of this was for Charles. There was very little left, of course. Even the birth certificate was lost, but a photograph of Roger and Philip's mother miraculously survived. And, of course, in the woman depicted in it, Charles recognized his ex-wife Helen. Unbelievable. I mourned my children for so many years, and they're alive. Oh, not all of them. Why? Why did she deceive me? How could I say such things about my own sons? The elderly man couldn't understand, grabbing his head. And what now? One is gone, the other has survived so much that it's unimaginable. Oh, all because of that foolish whim of their own mother. I would never have left them. Calm down, Charles, Sarah embraced him. But you found not only your son but also your grandson. Moreover, you helped your son so much. Thanks to you, he'll soon be coming home on his own 2 feet. We should be happy. And Philip will be so happy. He never knew he had a father, let alone such a good, loving one. Yes, you're right. I need to go see him, tell him. Oh, I don't know if he'll be happy. Because maybe he's been thinking his whole life that I abandoned him. If only I had known they were alive. Oh. Charles couldn't calm down. The next day, everyone, including Leo, whom his grandfather now didn't let go of, went to the hospital to see Philip. The surgery he underwent was successful. He hadn't gotten up yet, but progress was being made. Sensation had returned to his legs, he could move them. The news that the surgery was paid for not by just anyone but by his biological father stunned him. He was ecstatic, saying he never blamed his orphanhood on anyone. I don't hold a grudge against my mother either. You never know how life turns out, Philip said. Now we'll never know what drove her. I think she paid for everything herself. It's a pity, of course, she could have lived well until now, but what can you do about it? That's for sure. Now she's facing another judgment. And now, Philip, you need to recover without fail. You understand how hard it is for a son to live without a father. Wait a minute, something just occurred to me, Charles suddenly realized. So, does this mean I don't have to die now? Are you still doubting? Absolutely not, exclaimed Sarah. You have a grandson growing up. He must know his roots. Well, for the sake of this young man, I'll live a little longer, promised the grandfather. Doctors told me about some new methods that can be tested, and I didn't believe it, but now I have to. Yes, Father, getting treatment is difficult, but necessary. Where else can we go? I'm trying to. After all, there are people to live for. And I also want to see what life has in store, Philip laughed. After some time, he returned home, not quite on his own feet yet, with crutches, but still not in a wheelchair, which he thought he would never return to. He continued his recovery and was confident that he would be able to go fishing and play football with his son. And we'll take Grandpa with us, right, Leo? He asked his son, and he agreed. Charles did indeed take his health seriously, promising that he would definitely wait, if not for Leo's wedding, then certainly for Sarah and Philip's marriage ceremony. "When are you two lovebirds getting married?" he teased. "It's obvious that you love each other. What's the holdup? You're already a family. Your son will soon be going to kindergarten, and you still seem like strangers to each other." "We're not strangers at all, quite the opposite. But as for the wedding—" "Soon, Dad, soon," Philip said seriously. "As soon as I realize that I can get married without crutches, then immediately. What's the rush? People might think we have some sort of calculated marriage, a beauty marrying a cripple." And it happened 8 months later. Philip eventually managed to walk without assistance. He and Sarah got married. Charles spared no expense on the wedding, even though the young couple wanted a much quieter celebration. "Kids, have a conscience," he reproached them. "This is the first time I'll be attending my son's wedding. How about some modesty? Everything should be first class so that they remember it for a long time." And that's exactly what happened. The wedding was magnificent, although not very crowded, as the newlyweds had no relatives, but there were friends and faithful Rocky.